Welcome to the Daily History Chronicle. Each day, we travel back to discover a pivotal moment that changed the world. These aren't just dates and facts. They're stories of courage, conflict, innovation, and consequence that still echo through our lives today. Are you ready to explore? Let's see what happened on this day in history.
This is the Daily History Chronicle, where we explore the moments that shaped our world and discover why they still matter today. I'm Richard Backus, publisher of University Teaching Edition, and every day I get to share a piece of history that I think you'll find as fascinating as I do. The most decorated general in American history was about to warn the nation about the dangers of its own military. Dwight D. Eisenhower sat in the Oval Office on the evening of January 17, 1961, preparing to deliver his final address to the American people. In 3 days, he would hand the presidency to John F. Kennedy, the youngest elected president in the nation's history, taking over from the oldest in a century. An era was ending. Those who expected the former Supreme Allied commander to deliver a nostalgic farewell, perhaps echoing Douglas MacArthur's famous "Old soldiers never die" speech, were about to be surprised. Eisenhower had something else in mind. He had spent 2 years working on this address with his brother Milton and his speechwriters. He had studied George Washington's farewell address for inspiration, and he had a warning to deliver. In less than 10 minutes, Eisenhower would introduce a phrase that would echo through American politics for generations: the military-industrial complex. Coming from anyone else, the warning might have been dismissed as pacifist hand-wringing. But this was Ike, the man who planned D-Day, who accepted Germany's surrender, who served as NATO's first supreme commander. If Dwight Eisenhower said America needed to worry about military power, America needed to listen. Picture this. It's early evening in Washington, and the television cameras are set up in the Oval Office. Eisenhower is 70 years old. His health has been fragile. He suffered a severe heart attack in 1955 and a stroke in 1957. The burdens of the presidency have visibly aged him, but his mind is sharp and his concerns are deep. For 8 years, Eisenhower has walked a difficult line. As president during the height of the Cold War, he oversaw a massive expansion of American military power. The nuclear arsenal has grown exponentially. Defense spending has consumed an ever larger share of the federal budget. Contractors who once made plowshares now make missiles, and they have grown rich doing it. Eisenhower has resisted pressure to spend even more. When the Soviets launched Sputnik in 1957, triggering fears of a missile gap, hawkish voices demanded a crash program of military buildup. Eisenhower, who had access to classified intelligence showing the gap was largely imaginary, refused to panic. He balanced 3 of his 8 budgets, a feat that seems almost impossible by modern standards. But he knows that the forces he has helped create will not easily be contained. The defense industry has become permanent. The relationship between military leaders and the corporations that supply them has become intimate. And together they have the power to shape national policy in ways that may not serve the public interest. This is what he has come to say. Outside the White House, Washington is preparing for the Kennedy inauguration. The city buzzes with excitement about the new administration, the new generation, the new frontier. Inside the Oval Office, the old general prepares to deliver a message that the young president and all his successors will need to hear. To understand why Eisenhower's warning mattered, you have to know how profoundly World War II changed America's relationship with its military. Before 1941, the United States had no permanent arms industry. When wars came, American factories converted from civilian to military production. Makers of automobiles made tanks. Makers of sewing machines made rifles. When the wars ended, they converted back. The standing army was small. Military spending was modest. This had been the American way since the founding. World War II changed everything. The scale of that conflict demanded industrial mobilization unlike anything in human history. American factories produced over 300,000 aircraft, 100,000 tanks, and millions of tons of ammunition. The Manhattan Project created the atomic bomb. Radar, jet engines, and computing technology leaped forward. By war's end, the United States possessed the most powerful military the world had ever seen. And then the Cold War ensured it would stay that way. The Soviet Union, once an ally, became an existential threat. The fall of China to communism in 1949, the Korean War in 1950, the Hungarian uprising in 1956, each crisis reinforced the argument that America must remain armed and vigilant. There could be no return to pre-war normalcy. The weapons factories could not close. The military could not demobilize. Emergency had become permanent. By 1961, the transformation was complete. 3.5 million Americans worked directly in defense. Military spending exceeded the combined net income of every corporation in the country. A web of contracts connected the Pentagon to thousands of companies in every state and congressional district. Generals retired and went to work for the contractors they had once supervised. Lobbyists swarmed Capitol Hill, arguing for more ships, more planes, more missiles. Eisenhower had watched this happen. He had participated in it, and he had come to fear it. Eisenhower's January 17, 1961 speech lasted about 10 minutes, but its key passage would be quoted, debated, and invoked for decades to come. Until the latest of our world conflicts, Eisenhower said, the United States had no armaments industry. American makers of plowshares could, with time and as required, make swords as well. But we can no longer risk emergency improvisation of national defense. We have been compelled to create a permanent armaments industry of vast proportions. He acknowledged the necessity. He was not a pacifist. He was not calling for disarmament. He understood that the Soviet threat was real and that America needed to be strong. But then came the warning. In the councils of government, we must guard against the acquisition of unwarranted influence, whether sought or unsought, by the military-industrial complex. The potential for the disastrous rise of misplaced power exists and will persist. We must never let the weight of this combination endanger our liberties or democratic processes. The phrase military-industrial complex was new. Eisenhower's speechwriters, Malcolm Moos and Ralph Williams, had coined it specifically for this address. An earlier draft had included the word congressional, the military-industrial congressional complex, but Eisenhower removed it, perhaps not wanting to accuse his former colleagues on Capitol Hill directly. The warning was not limited to the military and its contractors. Eisenhower also cautioned against the growing power of what he called a scientific, technological elite, researchers and academics whose work increasingly depended on government funding and might therefore tailor their findings to please their patrons. The prospect of domination of the nation's scholars by federal employment, project allocations, and the power of money is ever present and is gravely to be regarded, he said. In both cases, Eisenhower's concern was the same, that concentrated power, even when created for legitimate purposes, could corrupt democratic governance. The people making decisions about war and peace might not be accountable to the voters. Institutional interests might skew the information shaping those decisions. The balance that the Constitution tried to establish between military and civilian authority might be slowly, invisibly eroded. Only an alert and knowledgeable citizenry, Eisenhower concluded, can compel the proper meshing of the huge industrial and military machinery of defense with our peaceful methods and goals, so that security and liberty may prosper together. The immediate reaction to Eisenhower's farewell address was muted. The nation was focused on Kennedy's inauguration, which took place 3 days later. The young president's stirring call to "ask not what your country can do for you" overshadowed the old president's cautionary words. But the phrase military-industrial complex did not disappear. It entered the American vocabulary and stayed there. During the Vietnam War, critics of American policy reached for Eisenhower's warning to explain how the nation had stumbled into a quagmire. The same generals and contractors who benefited from conflict, they argued, had helped push America into an unwinnable war. The military-industrial complex had become a self-perpetuating machine, hungry for enemies and indifferent to consequences. In the decades since, voices across the political spectrum have invoked the phrase. Conservatives have used it to criticize wasteful Pentagon spending and cost overruns on weapon systems. Liberals have used it to question the necessity of military interventions abroad. Libertarians have cited it as evidence that government power inevitably corrupts. Defense spending has continued to grow. The wars in Iraq and Afghanistan added trillions to the national debt. The revolving door between the Pentagon and defense contractors that Eisenhower implicitly warned about has become a well-documented phenomenon. Whether American military policy serves the national interest or the interests of those who profit from it remains a subject of fierce debate. As recently as January 2025, President Joe Biden invoked Eisenhower's phrase in his own farewell address, warning of the potential rise of a tech-industrial complex that could pose similar dangers. The language that Eisenhower introduced 64 years earlier remains the framework through which Americans discuss the relationship between power, money, and democracy. Near the end of his address, Eisenhower offered a vision of what he hoped America might achieve, and what might be lost if his warnings were ignored. Disarmament, with mutual honor and confidence, is a continuing imperative, he said. Together we must learn how to compose differences, not with arms, but with intellect and decent purpose. Those words capture the paradox at the heart of Eisenhower's message. He was a warrior who longed for peace. He had spent his life preparing for and waging war, and he understood better than most the terrible costs of conflict. He had built the military establishment he now warned against, and he feared what it might become without vigilant oversight. The man who planned the invasion of Normandy spent his final moments as president pleading for a world where disputes might be settled without bloodshed. It was not naivety. It was the wisdom of someone who had seen too much. These are the facts. On January 17, 1961, President Dwight D. Eisenhower delivered his farewell address from the Oval Office. In that speech, he warned the American people about the growing power of what he called the military-industrial complex, the alliance between the armed forces and the defense industry that had emerged from World War II and the Cold War. He urged citizens to remain vigilant against the corruption of democratic processes by concentrated interests. These are also facts. Eisenhower was uniquely qualified to deliver this warning. He was a 5-star general, the supreme Allied commander of the forces that liberated Europe, the architect of D-Day. No one could accuse him of being soft on defense or naive about military necessity. His credibility gave his warning weight that it might not otherwise have carried. And this is the consequence we still live with. The phrase military-industrial complex has become part of the American political vocabulary. It is invoked by critics of military spending, by opponents of foreign interventions, by anyone who worries that powerful institutions may pursue their own interests at the expense of the public good. Whether Eisenhower's warning has been heeded, or whether the dangers he identified have only grown, is a question that each generation must answer for itself. The old general knew he could not stop the forces he had helped create. He could only name them and hope that future generations would remain watchful. I'm Richard Backus, and this is the Daily History Chronicle. Tomorrow, we'll explore another moment that shaped our world. Until then, consider this. The man who led the largest military operation in history spent his final address as president warning about the dangers of military power. He had seen what armies could accomplish. He had also seen what they could destroy, and he wanted to make sure that the nation he had served understood the difference. Only an alert and knowledgeable citizenry, Eisenhower said, could keep American democracy safe from the very institutions created to protect it. That responsibility has not changed. The question is whether we are meeting it. Thank you for spending these few minutes with me. If you enjoyed this episode, I'd be grateful if you'd subscribe so you don't miss tomorrow's story. And if you have a moment, leaving a rating or a comment means more than you might realize. It helps other history lovers find us, and honestly, I read every single one. If this episode made you think, share it with someone who might appreciate it too. I hope you'll join me again tomorrow for more of our shared history.